Welcome, everyone. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. And thank you for all joining us today via Zoom for our virtual fireside chat with the Chief Executive Officer of Mubadala Investment Company's Petroleum and Petrochemicals platform, Musabbeh Al Kaabi. We have found that the term social distance isn't exactly right. We have physical distance, but we've learned through these events, these virtual events, that we're actually creating greater social closeness. And one of our most valued partners and people we turn to for advice is Mr. Al Kaabi. His background is too rich for me to list it all, but he joined the company in 2013 as Chief Growth Officer, responsible for new business development, mergers and acquisitions. Before that, he had a 16-year career at Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, where he had done a great many terrific things, including leading ADNOC's first ever offshore high pressure, high temperature, deep gas reservoir mechanical fracturing project. So this is an individual who knows a lot about this industry in a lot of different areas. He also initiated and led efforts to assess unconventional resources in Abu Dhabi, leading recent negotiations with international oil companies to conclude a number of joint venture agreements in Abu Dhabi. He's got a Bachelor of Science in Geophysical Engineering from the Colorado School of Mines, one of the best places in the world to do that, and a Master in Science in Petroleum Geoscience from Imperial College in London, so really rich background. I'm delighted to be hosting this under the auspices of the Global Energy Center. Randy Bell and his amazing team, Emily Burlinghouse has been responsible for this one, have really been doing amazing work in this virtual space. And you may want to attend some of their innovation streaming work, looking at the newest technologies in energy. There's another one of those on the agenda tomorrow. This January, the Atlantic Council's at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum in Abu Dhabi, Musabbeh gave us some great insight into Mubadala's investments in natural gas and renewables in companies and countries around the world. He also discussed the importance of environmental, social, and governance standards, ESG as they're known, in the petroleum and petrochemicals industry, and Mubadala's own energy and technology investments. Musabbeh, I don't think any of us would have guessed how much the world might have changed since we met in Abu Dhabi, but it has, and that's what we're going to be talking about. But even before this pandemic, Mubadala made ESG a priority. As the parent company of Masdar, it has always had a deep interest in renewables, and now, as it continues to expand in global petroleum and petrochemicals investments, it remains at the same time committed to these standards, raising awareness and mitigating the effects of waste from downstream products like plastic, and investing in the most efficient and emissions-conscious technologies. Mubadala's robust portfolio of investments across petroleum and petrochemical sector has positioned the UAE to remain resilient in times of crisis and oil price volatility, which we're experiencing in great measure. And then its diverse group of energy, IT, health, and biotech investments helps the UAE respond to the unique challenges of COVID. As we're going to hear from in a moment from our guest, the Mubadala has played a leading role in the UAE's response to severe public health crisis and unprecedented low oil prices, a sort of double whammy. Few are better suited than Musabbeh Al Kaabi to discuss the UAE's continued push toward diversification and innovation. So, before we begin, let me just say that because this event is entirely virtual, if you're interested in asking questions during the question and answer period, please submit them using the Q&A function that is at the bottom of your screen. You can submit your questions as well via Twitter using the hashtag AC Energy, and you can follow the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center at AC Global Energy, at AC Global Energy. We'll be reading some of these questions. We'll take probably a couple of them as well with people on video. So let's get started, Musabbeh. What I'd like to do is launch this because people are always interested about how you're experiencing this time. First, let me say to you, Ramadan Mubarak, and also Eid Ramadan. I think in a couple of days we're going to be experiencing that. So best wishes to you. What is this period of time like in a COVID-19 crisis for you personally, for your friends and family? And then after that, we'll get to talking about Mubadala and Mubadala's response.
Great. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Fred, for a very nice introduction. I am really truly pleased to be with all of you today, and I hope you and your families are safe and in good health. This is, as you mentioned, Fred, unprecedented times, and it taught us a lot of lessons. Or worst case scenarios. Back in 2019, we could not envisage a situation with this scale and this magnitude. So it is impacting everyone, and the reason that you, Fred, and I are doing this virtually now is a testament that yes, our life has turned upside down. But we see. And on a social, business, and also personal level, we can share many experiences. Let me share a few experiences based on my interaction with the team here in Abu Dhabi. We decided back in March to implement remote working and remote working away from the office. And it's been, I would say, initially a mixed feeling. But overall, we think it's a rewarding experience. I've seen that my team is more engaged. The productivity increased significantly. And you know what? We have a better work-life balance. I can spend more time with my family. I can see them on a daily basis now. And it is truly a unique experience. And I'm sure that many of our colleagues around the world are experiencing similar things. Let me take this also, Fred, also to recognize and also give a big thank you to our healthcare professionals. I am truly impressed with the work that is being done in the healthcare, especially here in the UAE, and also globally. I think they've put themselves in the front lines, and they're fighting a global pandemic, and they're putting themselves at a risk. We in Mubadala have, as you know, a dedicated sector in the healthcare, and we played our role globally and also locally here in the UAE to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. Also we've shared many experiences, we've shared, expertise. And one example is Cleveland Clinic here in Abu Dhabi. Fred, you've visited Abu Dhabi many times. So you're
I visited the clinic as well.
Yeah, so we have a team last month, shared and traveled to the US to share their expertise and experience here from the UAE. In the UAE also, we raised the yellow flag early back in January and February. We have identified two critical and important sectors that are very important when it comes to combating this pandemic. The two sectors are food security and healthcare. So I am also, I appreciate what the leadership and the government done here to ensure that the UAE is no short of food, when it comes to food, and put the right efforts to ensure that our healthcare system is equipped to deal with a pandemic like the one we see at the moment. So overall, it's been a unique experience, Fred, and we also work with our international assets to ensure that we support these assets, to ensure that some of these assets, which are classified as critical and essential, make sure that they operate at the maximum possible operating rate to provide the raw material for essential industries like food packaging, like medical applications. Yes, I think overall has been very strong commitment on all fronts. I encourage all of you to visit We Are Dedicated campaign that was launched by Mubadala recently. The idea is basically to ensure that we put the right efforts, resources in place for the local communities to support also local, and governments around the world and communities around the world. So it's been a very rewarding exercise, I would say. On a personal level, as I mentioned earlier, I think the fact that we run our business remotely has been, initially people were trying to say it might not work effectively, but overall it's been very rewarding. I see people more engaged, more productive, and very swift when it comes to answering emails and engaging with their team. So productivity overall has been, I'm not exaggerating, but I see an improvement in the productivity on the way we do things. And, I think that's one of the silver lining of the pandemic. And hopefully these lessons and these rewarding experiences, we will take them post-COVID-19.
Hey, thank you so much for that. I'm sure we'll have more questions from people on the line about those broader issues, but let's shift to the petroleum and petrochemicals business. Maybe first of all, you could talk to many who are with us today know your company extremely well, the larger company, others a little bit less so. How does this fit into the overall Mubadala portfolio? And how has this period of time, COVID-19, affected that business? What impact has there been on that business?
Well, I think the energy portfolio, or the petroleum and petrochemical portfolio in Mubadala is fully diversified and in the full value chain. So we have a business or asset under management of around $40 billion. We're active in the upstream, midstream, and downstream, including petrochemicals. And recently, we also are exploring the energy transition and where do we see the company in the near and mid and in the far future. But for the audience who are not fully aware of Mubadala, Mubadala is a sovereign wealth fund and global investor with $229 billion asset under management. We're active in 15 different sectors, including, of course, the traditional energy, but in the information technology, in the technology, real estate, healthcare, and in the technology as well. We, back in 2005-06, we decided to be ahead of the game and also invest more and more into the renewable energy. So we're very proud that one of the leading renewable energy companies in the region and globally is part of Mubadala family. So well-diversified institution. When it comes to the energy, the full integrated oil and gas business we're running, by far, Fred, we have been impacted strongly by this COVID-19. And it's across the board, not only the energy, every sector in the economy has been impacted. So back in 2019, when investment in organizations like Mubadala run their business plans, we have, envisaged a correction. And that correction probably was the worst case scenario. We see a recession with a correction in the equity market of around 30%, but we have not envisaged a pandemic with the scale that we see currently. I can say that I am really proud of what we've done with the portfolio because when something like this hit you, the first thing to do is a big question mark to everyone. How do we ensure that we emerge efficient and resilient out of this pandemic? So I'm really proud of all the collective work done by Mubadala and the assets that we run in order to come up with hundreds and thousands of initiatives to ensure that we weather this storm. But it might have, Fred, some long-lasting impact, and we are currently assessing what sort of long-lasting impact this pandemic could have on the business we're running. Like any other institution, also we came up with initially three basic recovery: V-shape, U-shape, and L-shape. So with time, we rolled out the V-shape recovery in the global economy. Now we're more focused, I would say 70%, we think there is a probability that we're experiencing a U-shape type of a global economic recovery. And we think that the global GDP will drop significantly this year. But next year, we hope that global economy will recover to a growth of around 5% GDP globally. In the depression or an L-shaped recovery, that's yet we're monitoring that situation or that scenario, but currently it's around 30% probability of happening. So we're keeping our eyes open for these trends, and we are adjusting accordingly our business to ensure that we emerge with the minimum damage and as resilient as possible. The good news also that we have not, this is not the first time we see a big disruptive event in our business. In 2014-15, I managed Mubadala upstream business, and at that time we were hit with a very deep, drop in the oil prices. It went down to almost $29. So we initiated a big campaign to ensure that whatever in the future we should remain over, so these initiatives that we embarked back in 2016 proved to be very rewarding these days. So, I'm very proud that, we're partially ready. I don't think anyone in the globe is 100% ready, but we're partially ready for these situations. And we are tackling it very professionally, and truly amazing job by many people around the world. And I see it also in our assets that we are trying to do our best to ensure that we emerge stronger from this big recession.
Thank you so much for that. Let me dig into that a little bit more. So first of all, that was really interesting. Let's hope for that 5% growth return and U-shape versus L-shape. It's good to hear that. Well, it's interesting to hear that 70% view is U-shape, because I think that's happening around the world now, moving from V-shape. But looking at the overall 229 billion under management, 40 billion in the field that you're overseeing, if I got that right. How does Mubadala run this broader set of investments right now in petroleum petrochemicals to help the UAE manage this oil price volatility? So if you can give any specifics, I think that would be really interesting, of what you've already implemented because of the COVID crisis.
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to the countrywide, I think the country has done a great job. We started a long time ago embarking on a big, aggressive diversification, economic diversification program back in 2006 and 7. We are still in the journey. So the aim by 2030 is to achieve an acceptable level of diversification away from conventional oil and gas business. So the journey is in progress. So where Mubadala comes into the picture here. So in Mubadala, part of our mandate was to help and work as a tech catalyst to ensure that there is an economic diversification in the country. So if you look 15 years back and now, we have managed to come up or establish a totally new industries in the country. So be it in the aluminum business. So we're in a partnership with Dubai. We're running one of the largest aluminum smelters globally. Information technology, we have a well-established business in the information technology driven by Mubadala in the country. When it comes to the renewable energy, as I mentioned or alluded earlier, Masdar is being a flagship company in the region and globally to invest in renewable energy, and it is in the right trajectory to become a leading renewable energy company globally. So there are many sectors that were introduced as a result of some initiatives driven by Mubadala and others as well to help diversify the economy. When it comes to the UAE economy, I think we are blessed with a few, I would say, parameters that differentiate the UAE in the region. First of all, our population is around 9.9 million. So relatively speaking, a small population. Then the country has a large oil and gas reserve. Last year, we were upgraded to become 6th largest oil and gas reserve globally. but not only the scale of the oil and gas, but also the resiliency. So the word resilient became very, very relevant to what we do nowadays, and when we talk about businesses in view of COVID-19. So the UAE oil and gas industry is definitely resilient, very low cost production, and will remain profitable for any possible scenarios in the energy transition going forward. On top of that, we have a very effective governing structure. And as I mentioned earlier, that the government took bold steps in January and February to focus on healthcare and food security. And that has taken, I would say, relatively speaking, very quick decision making to ensure that the country is in the right track to handle the pandemic and to ensure the security of the people here in the country. Last but not least, Fred, is the fact that the UAE has a very strong sovereign wealth fund, be it ADIA, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, or Mubadala, and we're playing our role to ensure that we generate a sustainable return to the shareholder, which is the government of Abu Dhabi. On top of that, we have established a very strong and concrete partnership with many, reputable partners from around the world, and here in the UAE and also outside the UAE. So you've heard lately the strong partnership that the national oil company ADNOC built in the country. We in Mubadala have a strong partnership with big business partners across the globe and also in the UAE. We announced last year on one of the assets I managed, Sabsa, to brought in Carlyle as a strategic partner. We see the benefit of bringing a strong partner like Carlyle with a strong partner like Mubadala. We complement each other, and we see definitely a strong, benefit to the business that we both, running. So yes, I think it's a multiple of factors, Fred, that differentiate UAE and put it in the right track. And before the session, I talked with you about maybe UAE is the only country in the world with a dedicated minister for artificial intelligence. What does that tell us? It tells us that we strongly believe in a different future. We strongly believe in a future where technology will be a critical part of our integrated economy. So I remain very optimistic that UAE, with the current governing structure, the current leadership vision, and the current dedication by well-respected institutions like Mubadala, ADIA, ADNOC, and others, we will put this country in the right track to be an effective and successful partner in the future.
Fascinating answer. And sixth largest oil and gas reserves in the world. I don't think everyone on this line knew that. And the story of resilience is also a very interesting one. The next face you'll see on the screen, I think, Musabbeh, will be a familiar one to you. McCroft is a regular attendee of our summits in Abu Dhabi. She's from RBC and is a member of the Atlantic Council's executive committee of our board. So Halima, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you so much for presenting today and for the Atlantic Council doing so many great events while we're all in the lockdown period. I wanted to ask you about the diversification drive. I mean, you mentioned, and we all know the role that Mubadala has really played in the diversification efforts in the UAE. I'm wondering now, with all of the oil price volatility that we've seen, since the start of the year, will this price volatility only sort of accelerate the diversification drive in the UAE and in the region? And what are the sort of obstacles that we have when countries talk about wanting to diversify the key oil producing countries? What do you think the biggest obstacle has been for these countries?
Okay, well, that's a great question, Halima, and good to see you, by the way. So I think I see a trend of an accelerated diversification. Abu Dhabi started the diversification journey back in the 2006, 2007. At that time, if you remember, we launched Mubadala, we launched Masdar as a symbolic, I would say, commitment to our future. I'll give you one, concrete example, Halima. Yesterday we announced a partnership with Honeywell to produce a medical mask N95 in a facility owned by Mubadala. This facility is Strata. It is manufacturing the composites for airlines or airplanes, and big customer, the customer is Boeing and Airbus. So because of the current pandemic situation, the demand for these composite parts of the airplanes dropped significantly. So we scratch our head. What can we do with a very sophisticated, manufacturing facility that exists in the UAE? So we signed and we talked with Honeywell to convert part of the manufacturing capability into the medical space or in the medical sector. So, in a matter of 1 month, I'm not exaggerating, 1 month, we managed to fine-tune, the equipment. We bought new equipments as well. And yesterday, the company started producing the N95 mask at a rate of 90,000 masks per day. So that's one example that, yes, we have the well, we have the capability, we have the vision, we have the strategy, and there is no excuse for anyone in this country not to work hard to fulfill that vision. And I am very optimistic because there are many, many ideas. And as maybe one of the outcomes of COVID-19, we see a global trend, and I would say many people raising the flag, saying we cannot rely on a single supply chain, a single country that give us the full supply chain. So we woke up one day saying that, yes, we heavily depend on China, for example, and I think there will be we will gonna redraw I would say the map of supply chain globally, and I think UAE is differentiated by a very strategic location hub, and hopefully we'll take advantage of these mega trends globally that will position the UAE in the right track to accelerate the diversification efforts. I hope that answered your question, Halima.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you, Halima, for that. So I have a couple of questions that I'm going to group together here that have come in, and then after this group, I'm going to turn to another regular of our event in Abu Dhabi, Adam Sheminsky from Capsark. But let me first turn to this a couple of written questions. Dalia Naim of Reuters, forgive me if I didn't pronounce that correctly. Her question is trying to get more to some specifics, as any good journalist would. I did work for 25 years at the Wall Street Journal, as you know, sir. And her question is saying, were there any specific projects, expansion plans in certain regions, countries that were deferred to coronavirus? So anything specifically that you've deferred because of coronavirus? How are investments for this year's affected? Any limitations? And then the second part of this is, has the impact affected any renewable energy projects, deferred implementation for some of them? So I think it's trying to get at some of the specifics of issues that you've spoken about so far from others.
Well, I think that's a great question and typical question when it comes to knowing more about the business. So yes, we reviewed all our activities across the board, and we identified basically two categories. What is critical and important and must have, and what is optional and good to have. So many of the activities that our assets are running, either fall in one of these two categories. So yes, we have pushed many activities away. These are good to have, not critical. And especially when it comes to, I would say non-critical CapEx programs, we push that back. And some, OpEx programs, we reduce them significantly. But in the big ticket items, we stick with our current and previous plan. So let me start with the upstream. We're progressing very well with the big gas development project in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia. So that has not seen any slowdown, except maybe a few weeks of a lockdown in Malaysia, but that project is moving forward. For Borealis, one of the assets we manage, also they have a $1 billion project in Belgium, BADH, and that project is progressing. No slowdown in that one. With Nova Chemicals in North America, we have a big capex program as well, and currently we're committed, trying to ensure that these programs will be executed within the time frame allocated to them. So yes, I think there are many activities, and I don't think we have time to go through every single activity that we're doing. But in a nutshell, many of the unnecessary OPEX and CAPEX programs being deferred. We are trying to reduce the cost as much as possible and try to walk the talk and say, you know what, we are resilient, and let's prove to everyone that we're resilient. So that's on the oil and gas sector. When it comes to the renewable energy, I don't see any also slowdown. Abu Dhabi announced recently a big project, a 2 gigawatt project, and truly impressive cost per kilowatt hour. So if my math correct, if I remember it, it's 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's a remarkable drop in the solar energy, and that will open a door for the solar energy to expand more and more. So I don't see also any slowdown on the solar and on the renewable projects in the region. Contrary, I see maybe more push into this sector.
Very interesting. So one sort of more, I guess, a grouping of a couple of questions before I turn to Adam. So this is one more that I will read off to you. There was a question whether there any specific projects. Well, just a minute. Sorry. Sorry. Here it is. Mubadala's appetite for U.S. LNG export projects after your investment in next decade. So perhaps talk about the whole unconventional gas and oil sector in more broadly as well, and then more specifically the U.S. LNG export projects related to your investment in next decade.
Well, I think that's a great question. Well, there is no doubt that pre-COVID-19, the most interesting development in the energy sector in the last, I would say, 40 or 50 years was the introduction of the shale revolution. The technologies of mechanical fracking, horizontal drilling unlocked a significant resources in the US and put the US as one of the leading, or maybe I can say the leading oil and gas producer globally. So as a result of this shale revolution, there are many, I would say, there are many associated activities related to the shale. So on one hand, we see an expansion in the downstream, like petrochemical industries being relocated back to the North America. And on the other hand, also the ability of the US to become one of the leading LNG producers and exporter globally. So our thesis have been challenged, but we still believe that the thesis in the long term is still valid, because you cannot ignore the Permian in the US. The Permian will be developed, will be produced. The technology will improve and will unlock additional resources. The current oil prices is maybe not helping, but what it will do, I think it will slow the growth of the shale production, but it will not completely kill it. So we still believe that the world needs conventional, and we see a world where both of these resources will play a role going forward to meet the energy demand globally. So I'm not, at this stage, I'm not extremely worried about the potential expansion of LNG in the US. Contrary, I think they will keep pushing that, and the US will become a key exporter of LNG globally. Underpinned by the business fundamentals and the need for oil and gas, at least for the foreseeable future.
Thank you for that interesting answer, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners in the United States will be encouraged by. Perhaps right to the leadership. So let me turn to Adam Sheminsky, president of CAPSARC. And Adam, have we reached you in Riyadh, or where are you sheltering?
That's the CAPSARC Plaza in the background there. I'm in Riyadh, and we're doing okay here.
That's terrific.
Thank you, Fred. Dr. Al Kaabi, you know, in a carbon-constrained world, finding ways to reduce, reuse, recycle, maybe even remove carbon dioxide is going to be increasingly important. I know that Abu Dhabi already has a project underway taking carbon dioxide from a steel plant and using it to drive oil production. Do you see other opportunities for investment that could promote the idea of finding ways to manage the carbon dioxide so that hydrocarbon assets, the oil that Abu Dhabi has and the gas, can continue to be used?
Yeah. Well, Adam, very good question. And, you know, let me take you back, Adam, to the early 70s, just to share with you our commitment as a country to when it comes to the environmental aspects of our activities. So historically, Abu Dhabi has been a responsible energy provider. Back in the 70s, when many countries around the world used to flare hydrocarbon associated gas, we decided to take a bold step, and we built the first LNG project in the Middle East. At that time, we called it AdGas. Start operation back in 1977. So to me, that was a visionary step by the leadership to ensure that the UAE is developing its natural resources with, as a responsible developer and provider of energy. And then in the 90s, we adopted and embraced a very also aggressive program called zero flaring. So we became one of the least flared or the least flaring when it comes to oil and gas activities in the region. So very strong track record of being a responsible, prudent developer of natural resources. And as you rightly said, we also embarked on a very challenging project at that time, capturing CO2 emission from a steel factory here in the Abu Dhabi and injecting it 70 kilometers away in one of the oil fields. So that shows also a strong leadership and responsible when it comes to the climate change, CO2 emission. So a combination of commitment to renewable energy, carbon capture, zero flaring, and more renewable energy in the future, and a peaceful nuclear program to replace some of the gas generation. So a combination of all these initiatives is definitely putting the UAE at the forefront when it comes to the tackling the climate change. So Adam, in a nutshell, yes, I think as a responsible developer and provider of energy, we need to have more of these initiatives in the future. It could happen next year, it could happen in 10 years, but ultimately it's going to happen. And when you look at the climate change agenda, how it developed maybe in the late 80s to now, it is really sad to see that the industry lost the narrative. The narrative has been controlled by media, politicians, and more pressure on the industry we see as a result of that. So I think it is prudent, it is critical, it is important for oil and gas producers all globally to ensure that they embrace, adopt, and implement the latest technology when it comes to eradicating CO2 emission. It is not an option, I think. It is a must in the future, especially in view of the ESG and climate change. We need to show the world, we need to put ourselves in a leading and capture the narrative one more time and prove to the whole world that yes, we are a responsible producer of energy with the minimum possible carbon footprint.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your question, Adam. A follow-up on that, Musabbeh, as you know, even before the COVID-19 outbreak, the ESG was a major topic. What you're talking about was a major topic for energy companies. During the COVID-19 crisis, several oil majors have announced net zero commitments. How does Mubadala think about this question of that sort of commitment?
I think it's, Fred, it's becoming very critical in our business. We are a global investor, so definitely we need to show that we are a responsible investor, and we are a responsible investor. So I don't want to repeat what I've said before, but when you look at Mubadala portfolio, we invest in renewable energy, we invest in technology, we have a venture capital team as well, investing in many startup companies that are promoting these energy transition going forward. In my platform as well, last year we initiated a big study to look at all the, how do we see Mubadala in 5-10 years from now, and how do we position ourselves in the energy transition. So I identified a few interesting ideas. Where do we see ourselves in the future? Mubadala took the ESG very seriously. We have established a committee, which I am part of, to understand the requirement, the implications on us as an investment institution. And we are in the process of finalizing our ESG policy sometime during this year. So yes, we share the same concerns like everyone else on the globe. We have been a responsible investor. We have invested in many sectors that support the energy transition and support the decarbonization of the economies going forward. So overall, Fred, it is going to be part of our activities going forward. Is it going to change the current portfolio? Not much, but going forward, I think it will have an impact on our decisions when it comes to new investments.
Thank you so much for this answer. Here's apparently from someone you must know, Mara Al-Sawadi. It's good to see you are well, my brother Al Kaabi. What AI technologies does Mubadala want to focus on? AI used to be a nice to have, but now with COVID, it's a must to achieve operations excellence even from afar.
Yeah. Well, to start with, Mubadala is a big believer in technology and big believer in looking forward. So we try to identify the trends that will shape the future. So and with a growth strategy in Mubadala, we identified some of the trends, and I think that and we believe that the technology will play a big role in to shape the future. It will disrupt everything, not only the energy, but the technology will disrupt many conventional industries, even the financial institutions, banking sector, airlines, transportation sector, healthcare. So yeah, AI is one of the key theme of technology that we're looking at, and we have a venture capital teams in Europe and in San Francisco in the US. These teams are working day and night to identify suitable opportunities and startup companies that will have the potential to reshape the future. And that's what our team is spending their time and trying to identify these trends and be part of the future. So yes, technology is going to play a big part. We historically invested in technology. We are currently investing in technology, and we will invest in technology in the future. So a combination of artificial intelligence and automation would be a very interesting theme to explore here in the region, and could put the region and the UAE in an interesting position, because we have access to low energy, and we can build these industries that can deploy automation, artificial intelligence, and we could become, a supplier of industrial products in the future. So this is a vision that many people within the organization and within the country are closely monitoring, and hopefully will put, our flag somewhere in this journey.
So here's a question that we just got terrific attendees, terrific people in this virtual room. I'm just so pleased by this. This comes from Juma Al-Arami of Oman LNG. The question is, how have current challenges offered opportunities for organizations to be more agile, shifting strategies and reprioritizing? I mean, I know for us at the Atlantic Council, we've made more changes in the digital space in 9 weeks than we had in the previous 2 years. So it's really been driving what we're doing. But obviously, this gentleman from on LNG would love to hear your view on this.
Yeah. Well, I saw an interesting, graph recently that Zoom, the one that you and me, Fred, are using now, and the the value of this company is equivalent to many airlines companies in the US. So that gives you how the world is changing. So the digital world is truly I would say reshape our life, be it in the business side and on the personal level. So what I can say is that yes, this COVID-19 is almost a wake-up call, and we need to reset our mindset when it comes to the investment. And big question would be in the future: is my business resilient, not only to recessions, maybe to pandemic, and what trends do we see that will benefit from this pandemic, or will not benefit, but let's say will emerge as a result of the pandemic? So on top of my list would be the technology and the life sciences, biotechnology. So these two are very interesting sectors to monitor and see. In the energy sector, I think any energy investments that is taken or in a view of the energy transition would be an attractive to many investment companies around the world. And I will see probably a more effort put in the energy transition going forward. But the oil and gas will remain a significant part of the energy in the future. So you need to keep monitoring the landscape of the energy in view of the energy transition. We may see a world where oil will peak around 2030. Could be slightly earlier, could be slightly later, but that's the reality. And we need to ensure that whatever scenario we see in the future, any business should remain resilient and should be efficient, sufficient to weather that trend.
So the next person to appear on your screen, it's almost as if we're holding the Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum in Abu Dhabi right here on our screen. So Adnan Amin, a great partner of ours, the former leader of IRENA. So Adnan, over to you. And where have we reached you, Adnan?
I'm taking refuge in New York. My sabbatical at Harvard was truncated by COVID, and I'm just waiting to go back to Abu Dhabi. All my friends are asking me if I'm okay in New York because they're very afraid of the situation here.
Stay safe.
I'm fine. I'm fine, Musabbeh. Great to see you. I very much enjoyed your comments, and I recognized very much the strategy that I saw unfolding over the last 8 or 9 years in the UAE. And I think one of the key things that I've seen is that when you have a real diversification strategy, I think many people are struggling with what does diversification mean for them when they are a resource resilient or resource dependent society. But the UAE has made tremendous progress, and what you gave as an example I've been really inspired by, which is the Strata example, and the manufacturing of the N95 masks in such a short period of time. Please send me a few when they're ready. You cannot have them in New York. But I wanted to ask you one thing, Musabbeh, is that the level of disruption we are seeing is historically unprecedented in the global economy. We've never seen anything like this. And, all our bets about what shape of recovery we'll have and so on is, we can hope for the best, but it's an unknown.
Yeah.
In that, I was very interested by the fact that you stressed the strategy you have to focus on technology, especially artificial intelligence and biotechnology. And I've seen also in the UAE, it's quite remarkable progress has been made in developing farming, for instance. So do you see that these new emerging technologies are going to be utilized not only as an investment strategy for the UAE, but also as an industrialization strategy internally? Is this how you're seeing this? Because I want to make one last comment, is that you were, I think, quite optimistic about the recovery of shale. My sense is that shale has taken such a beating and that it is so heavily leveraged that this shock is going to shake out that industry quite dramatically, because their cost of production is way higher than anything the market will bear for the coming time. And will that have an impact on the global oil market after recovery? Thanks.
Well, thank you, Adnan. I think we miss you in Abu Dhabi. I hope to see you soon. And I hope you stay safe in New York. And it's been also really a pleasure knowing you and your leadership in IRENA here. So thank for all your effort. I think when it comes to the technology, we have, maybe you know this, Adnan, we've bet on technology big time, starting with mustard, if you remember back in 2006. And people at that time were asking, are you kidding me? An oil producing country with a renewable energy back 2006? Yeah. So that was visionary vision at that time, and we proved to be correct. So, and I am really glad to see, mustard being a global leader now in the renewable energy. When it comes to the technology, I am confident that it will play a big role in the future. And I don't like the argument when people ask me that technology will disrupt oil and gas. Well, it's not going to disrupt oil and gas only. It's going to disrupt every aspect of our society, every aspect of the economy. So you take the healthcare, you take the financial institutions, you take many, I would say, sectors will be disrupted by the technology. So I agree with you. I think the technology will enable countries like the UAE to pivot into the next, future. And you mentioned a few examples. So I am really intrigued by the fact that we managed to produce the lowest cost energy globally by solar energy. So that's unlocking many other, I would say, sectors that depend on energy. So we will see how these sectors will be developed in this region, taking advantage of almost free energy with the solar energy, I mean. So yes, and then look at the technology side, artificial intelligence, automation. So if you couple these two, automation, artificial intelligence, there are many sectors that can be opened in this region, taking advantage of three basic requirements: access to affordable energy, artificial intelligence, automation. You put the three together and the sky is the limit. So I think there would be many interesting concepts coming up, and I am optimistic that some of these industries will be established and in this region, and pivot the region from heavily depending on oil into a more diversified economies in the future. So that's my view, and that's what we believe in Mubadala. And as I mentioned, we monitor that space very closely. It's interesting you mentioned also the farming, because UAE is an arid desert-like climate, and it's really difficult to expand farming on a big scale. But with the technology, one of the companies that we invested in the US is coming up with a very innovative way of vertical farming, deploying artificial intelligence, so a very limited space with a much less water requirement, you can produce a lot. And that would be also revolutionary in the region. If we can expand into these techniques and technologies on a bigger scale, I think that's definitely a move in the right step for the region. let me comment on the share revolution. Share revolution, I partially agree with you, but I think it will stay. The reason because if you look at the global oil demand, we're going to peak probably in the next, I don't know, you can say 5, 10 years maximum. And at that time, it's going to be maybe around 106, 105 million barrel of oil per day. And then it will start gradually declining. But you need a massive investment in order to just minimize the natural depletion, which is around 5%. On top of that, if you put all the resource base globally, I would say 10 million barrel of oil per day is not profitable and not commercial below $35 oil price. So the moment you drop below 35, you almost have the risk to lose 10 million barrel globally. So I think the high cost producers probably will set the price. So if the price is 35 or 40 or 45, it will allow at least the Permian in the US to continue producing, but not on the same scale and growth we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years. It is going to be heavily impacted, but it will remain a producer for the foreseeable future. That's my view. And, we live in a very volatile environment. So my view, if you talk with me next week, it might be different. But that's what we see. How do we see the world based on the information available today?
We've run out of time. I think I've got one other question here from Carlos Pascual, if I can find it on my screen. Here it is. So let me close with these two questions. And how do you, this is from Carlos Pascual, and you know Carlos quite well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Also a member of our board, our former ambassador to Mexico, to Ukraine, and many other feathers in his very large cap. So how do you see your investment portfolio balance in a decade in terms of regional balance, a shift to further Asia, and number two, shore of hydrocarbons, recognizing your points on the energy transition. So very interesting question to close with, which is the question of regional balance, shore of hydrocarbons. And let me also include, if you want to touch this, we've had a question early on Egypt and how you see Egypt developing. That may be too long of an answer, but just in general, there's been a lot of buzz about how the energy industry could have developed with new Egyptian resources. So Carlos' question and the Egypt question, if you feel you have the time or
okay.
to.
Hi, Carlos. Nice to see you. I miss seeing you here in Abu Dhabi. And so I think when it comes to our portfolio, we are a strong believer, as I mentioned earlier. We are a progressive, forward-looking organization. So we are not in a state of denial. We understand the energy transition. We are committed to ESG, and we are also gonna, take decisions to ensure that our portfolio remains relevant and resilient under these different energy outlooks. So Mubadala will focus on, at least in the energy space, will take the energy transition very seriously. We will identify opportunities that will fit our investment thesis, and we will continue working on that. But we're also a strong believer in that the energy transition will come with a stronger demand on natural gas. And if you look at the current portfolio of Mubadala, it is gas weighted. So we have more than 50% of our portfolio in the upstream part is gas weighted. So we believe that the natural gas will play a complementary role in diversifying the energy demand globally or in the future. So that's so we'll continue monitoring these trends, and I see that Mubadala portfolio in 5 or 10 years from now will be resilient and fit for the future. The last question, I think you touched, Carlos or Fred, on Egypt. There is no doubt that Egypt is the largest market in the Middle East. You're talking about 100 million people in that and in that country. The latest discoveries in Egypt, I would say, reshaped the energy landscape in Eastern Mediterranean, and we're glad that we made the right decision to be part of the Bohor, the giant gas field in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have a very strong partners. We are very satisfied with the market there, and the project is going in the right direction with an upside, hopefully in the future. So yeah, Egypt ranks in the region very high due to the market, economy, and the resource base it is enjoying. So overall, very positive outlook about Egypt.
So it's clear from me from the lineup of questions that we have that more and more people were willing to pitch in. So perhaps we in another couple months down the line, we may want to do this again. I want to thank you for taking so much time, Musabbeh. I want to thank really a rich group of people with a lot of expertise joining the call. Carlos, thank you for that last call, that last question. And we hope that you'll all attend our next session. Musabbeh Al Kaabi, Musabbeh, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone. Please.